All right. So, starting with Vises, thank you so much for your kindness, as well as thank you so much for giving back to the community. We are equally excited and we are so privileged to have you with us today. Um, all of you, the group participant, um, a little bit about Vises. Vises has more than 12, 13 years of experience, stayed around the world, couple of countries, and nowadays he is in Singapore. Prior to that, he lived in the UK as well as he lived in the Lebanon and then started his career with India. The other thing about Vises is he is a all-time AWS certified professional. Vises works for AWS in one of their premium group. It's called AWS ProServe. Most of you always have the aspiration in the community group. We speak about AWS, right? And then specifically we speak about AWS ProServe. So that's where we are so privileged to have you, Vises. Thank you so much. Any opening or anything you want to share with us, Vises, before we start?
Oh, thank you so much for the kind words. I am honored to be part of this community and just happy to contribute. I've done these kind of trainings online, in person in my past roles, but within AWS, considering the last year, it's all been online. I'm very happy to be here. Glad to speak to you all. Just one quick request: fire up as many questions as you want. I don't want it to be a one-way street where I'm speaking for 90 minutes and you guys get bored. Let us have a chance to discuss whatever topics, whatever scenarios that might come into your minds regarding this particular topic. We will primarily focus on the why aspect of control tower and AWS organizations and, for example, service control policies, just to give you an understanding on why should they be used in the first place, and we will cover the how part later.
Sure, sure, Vises. So, and as Vises said, a topic how he is going to share with us. So, when you start working on cloud, um, as Vises said, the first thing is trying to understand how the account structure works. You know, it's like when you go to a bank, before you do any transaction with a bank, what is the first thing it happens? You open an account, right? And then if you have a company, then you may have multiple accounts. So today's topic I wanted to share with all of you with the help of Vises' vast experience practically is how this account structure works, what is multi-account lending zone, how is this control tower as a service is going to help or helping the organizations to manage the multiple accounts. So So this is starting with a first question, which in the group we always have this curiosity. When we started learning cloud, we always had this curiosity. Let's say there is a company in Asia, it's an e-commerce company. For the explanation purpose, any a fictitious name, let's say they have operations in all over Asia, in all the 16, 17 countries, and they have their own data centers in those respective countries because they integrate with banks, they integrate with the local suppliers, they need to ensure that they need to manage the country level traffic when the buy and sell is happening in terms of the product and services. So that's where they relied upon the in country or country specific data centers. So with the cloud adoption, they decided that they want to move into cloud. So the first question which comes to our mind is, we says, when they want to get into cloud, the very first step of opening an account with AWS, since they are an enterprise, do you think the way we as learners on AWS Cloud Console, we go and register using our credit card? But for an enterprise, do you think they have a different process? Or irrespective of whether it is a big company, small company, or whatever company, that the very first step is log into the AWS console and register using any one of the company credit card.
So the short answer, it's the same for everyone, right? Over a period of time, your billing method can change, right? But it's the same for everyone to start with. Let's say you are an enterprise, like in the example particularly. The question can be, can the account manager or can someone from AWS register an account on your behalf? We can't, right? We don't have access to your email, right? It has to be, because it is going to be your landing zone, not our landing zone. We can't use one of our we should not use one of our AWS accounts to create a landing zone for you, right? Even though it is faster getting people to create an email account, but that's not the right way, right? You own the keys to this account. This is the root account that will be used for your landing zone for all things on AWS. We would not create it for you. We can sit with you, the account managers, whoever it is, they can sit with you, guide you through the process, which is fairly simple. Just give the name, credit card details, billing address, phone number, and all of that. And that's all there is that there is to create the main account, the root account. That is the first account.
Okay. Thanks, Visay. So all of you in the group who we debated and we sort of got the curiosity, right? So you heard from Visay that irrespective of small, big, whatever it is, the very first step opening an account is same for everybody. So now as a next step, Visay, so now that they open an account, it's a root account, and they have one of the country they have opened, let's say Singapore. That's their regional office, and they open the account. But now the question is, they have all these operations across all the countries. They have their own data centers. So help us to know how they should further proceed, build their account structure in such a way that when they start migrating applications or workloads to AWS cloud in the Asia Pacific, all these countries, how they should first start. As you rightly mentioned, why part. It is actually today we will talk about the why part, and then in the next session we will talk about the how part. So why it is necessary, what are the challenges they would face, and then how they should keep ready.
Okay, let me take a step back.
Sure.
Number one question. One account was supposed to be enough, right? Because it's not a region specific account. It's not a Singapore specific account. You create an account, you create it in all the regions. It gives you access to all the regions, especially, all the non-government regions.
Right.
US Gov Cloud and all of it. Remove that, but it gives you access to all the regions. Question is, why do you need multiple accounts in the first place? Because that's how it was anyway started. If you wanted another account, you had to register and create another account with your credit card and everything all over again. The important question is why. So I will focus on a lot of these why questions. Because without why, it's just a matter of Googling stuff and figuring out the how, right? In most scenarios. So the question is, why do you need 2 accounts or 3 accounts or 5,000 accounts? That is number one, right? Any thoughts on why do we need so many accounts? Or how many accounts should we start with?
Audience, anyone?
Maybe on considering the taxation in taxation difference in the different regions.
Taxation could be one.
Yeah.
Taxation, good point. Taxation could be one. Now, on taxation perspective, if these are completely separate business entities, and they have their own registered entities in different areas, taxation is definitely one. We have worked with different customers and who have tried to solve this problem. There are actually companies who are partners of AWS who help companies solve this problem even within the same organization. So what happens is you have this one pair account, and then you have multiple accounts underneath it. You club these multiple accounts underneath it, and you get a contract with a third-party company. And you get a contract with a third-party company. The third-party company takes care of making inventory of that account 1, 2, and 3 belong to this business organization, small. organization within, let's say, Singapore. Account 4, 5, and 6 belong to some other, and they do that internal chargeback. So that is one, but that is not the most common one. Any other thoughts on
To share the
Yeah.
workloads,
to share the workloads or to split the workloads?
to split the
workload,
workloads. Yeah.
To
And it
split
could be
the workload.
security control over the environment.
Okay.
Or probably like if you want to have different environment, like you have productions, you have development of the test environment. You want to separate your
To separate, sorry, please go on.
to separate your workloads. You have a production environment, you have a test and the dev environment. So if you want to separate that, then it is good idea to have a different account.
Okay, so this is actually the most important point. Segregation of duties. Prabhu has said segregation of duties. So let's elaborate on this. Can one account host multiple environments? When we say environment, let's say an application in e-commerce site, abc.sg, for example, that would have a corresponding UAT environment, that could have a corresponding multiple dev and test environments. Technically, can they exist within one account? Answer is absolutely yes.
Yes.
Right? Should they exist in one account? We very strongly recommend that they should not be in one account, especially the production should be in a separate account. The other ones can be in one account if you really want to do. But production and non-production should be very separate. Now, why do we say that? Again, if you focus, always the question to be asked is why. Now, the reason why we do that is, first of all, we want to restrict access to production. Let's say, have 100 developers, infrastructure engineers in my e-commerce company, like Joe, just continuing on the example that Joe said. We don't want them to access production. We want a very limited set of people to have access to production that should be much more secure than people accessing development. Now, you can say the counter argument that I get a lot of times is you can write IAM policies, and that can be used within one account to segregate access to production and development. And my answer to that is it will be incredibly complex IAM policies, and you will never get it right, and you will never cover all the scenarios. Because you are not just going to write one IAM policy to say with a particular tag that I, as a user of a particular group, should be able to create instances which have a particular tag, environment is equal to production. You can write that policy. I agree, right? But then what about security groups? What about network ACLs? What about EBS volumes? All of those things becomes an entirely big laundry list of what am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do. It's like two people sharing a house, or not a house, let's say a hall, right? And then you are trying to define that you can switch on that light bulb and I can switch on that light bulb. Just segregate the hall itself, right? Put that guy in some other hall, you do whatever you want in that hall, and I will do whatever I want in this hall. Right? So that is the idea. You can write incredibly complex policies, but it will never scale. Tomorrow, some other guy has to come in. You have to write again that policy, considering that scenario. AWS launches another service. You have to again update that policy. It never scales up. Right? So that is number one reason of segregation of duties, segregation of responsibilities on what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do. Right? Now, cost was also mentioned. Costing can technically be done at a resource level because costing can be attributed using tags. Right? That is absolutely fine. But then there are shared costs. For example, in a multi-account structure, there might be certain shared resources like deployment pipelines, which are generally shared across environments, common networking components, transit gateway and all, right? I get that a lot of time. Companies come to us and say, we want to attribute to different business units how much transit gateway cost they consumed. So let's say transit gateway cost for a month was $1,000, right? I have 5 business units. The question that comes is, I want to say that business unit A should pay $200, B should pay $400 and split it across the rest. I want to do it at a packet level, right? There is no way to do it easily. right? It is trying to solve a problem. The solution itself will cost you $10,000 if you were able to do it, right? What we recommend in that particular case is we know that business unit A has one account A 1, 2, 3, right? B has 4, 5, 6, and C has something else. What we tell them is, let's say your transit gateway cost is $1,000. You add sum the cost for business unit A, which is the combined cost of account 1, 2, and 3, and take that as a percentage of cost of the overall account, overall bill. So just split the cost of the shared resources by the percentage of your actual bill, 1, 2, and 3, right? And that is a more common sense way of doing it rather than over engineering a solution which doesn't have to be engineered in the first place.
How do you apply the percentage? How do you know how many packets are used by a specific account?
You don't do it on a packet level. You just say that account 1, 2, and 3 has a total combined cost of $200. The overall cost was $1,000. Okay, so your percentage of cost is 1/5 of the overall cost. And from the bill, you know that the transit gateway cost was around, let's say, $50. So you pay 1/5 of 50. That becomes your share of the shared cost. And what we also recommend is all these shared resources, right? They go into a separate account.
So
like
the
networking.
so the percentage is statically defined, and then you segregate it.
It's not statically defined. On a monthly basis, you will get a different bill.
Yeah, the
The
percentage
formula is static.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry. Go on.
For the formula is static. The formula essentially is sum of the cost of your accounts divided by the overall cost of all the accounts. That is your share, percentage share. Today it is 1/5, tomorrow it may be 1/6, 1/7. And then you apply that percentage to the cost of the shared resources and say everyone has to agree to it. This is central IT process. This is the most common sense that we can do rather than going into an over-engineered solution or doing it at a packet level.
Is it possible if we know the on account level, probably let's say account A has 10 resources, let's say 10, 5 EC2 and so on and forth, right? And all the resources where you have data in and out, that is calculated in some way for the billing purpose, right?
Correct. See, you can do it, but I'm trying to say that these are over-engineered solutions. Data in and out on a packet level. There are different cost components in an AWS bill. Data out, machines transferring data across AZs. All that needs to be calculated. Who has the time for it? Right? There are more. Just think about it. We are not in the business of calculating data between machines. AWS is already doing that. It gives us a cost. That's fine. You want to go deeper into details, enable the detailed cost reports. You can still figure it out. Do we run a business of figuring out what is the data, or do we run a business of serving our customers? Like you have a company, you have an e-commerce company. I mean, continuing with the same example. Try solving the business problems, not the IT problems. The IT is an enabler. The sooner we understand that we are an enabler of business problems, the better it is. Rather than inventing super complex problems for us to implement and then patting our own backs that we have solved those problems.
You have nailed down very well, Vishesh. Increasingly in today's world and over the last 2 years, right? The over engineering in the form of blog or all these things is coming more than actually solving the actual business case. You perfectly nailed down.
We tell our business sometimes, even as IT, right? I've worked on both sides of the IT and business as well. We tell our businesses that even though we are on AWS, your provisioning times is like 5 days or 6 days or whatever the SLA is, right? It can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We have to just enable the business to do their thing and make sure that they are happy.
Yeah.
Right?
So
now let's go back to the original why solution. So security was one. Very good point. Blast radius. So there is a slight different angle to security around blast radius. So the initial point that we covered on security was that we want our people to have different permissions on different kinds of environments. So that was a day-to-day operational piece of work. Then there is the blast radius argument. The blast radius argument says that if, let's say, a hacker gets access to to an AWS account, and if that has production and development and all sorts of things, it is very likely that all of them are potentially compromised. Because there is no distinction between an EC2 instance which is serving production versus an EC2 instance which is serving development. It's how we work, how we understand by tags and all. But since everything is running together, our blast radius. So when it's a war kind of a terminology, but in a hall, if there is, continuing with the hall example, in a hall, if there is a blast, then everything inside the hall is impacted. Whereas if there are two halls and if there is a blast in one hall, the other hall is not impacted. So if your dev accounts or dev environment is hacked, then just your dev account is hacked. It will not probably make the news. But if your production account is hacked, it will make the news and you will have to stand in front of regulators and be sorry about it and do a lot of, someone will essentially get fired in that case as well. We don't want to be in that scenario. So that's why you segregate accounts. Permissions, security, blast radius, cost attribution, all of these things make it really important. And it's just very, very strongly recommended from AWS that you have a multi-account landing zone. How multi it is going to be is your particular scenario. So some people say, I have customers who say, business wants one application, we give them 4 accounts. They want to run a service, we give them 4 accounts. The 4 accounts are dev, test, staging, and production. Right? Extreme end of segregation per application, and every application essentially becomes an account. And it works for them, right? They've sorted out their networking, connectivity, and all of that. They may have 2 transit gateways to connect production and non-production accounts separately. So even the network traffic does not flow cross between dev and production on the same device. There's a different device, different logical device at least, right? So no one has any access, right? You can't even connect from dev to production. There is nothing which is connecting dev to production. Some companies say, okay, production is fine. We will segregate production. We will have 1 production account. We will have 1 non-production account. Just 2 accounts throughout the company, right? Have they met the blast radius argument? Yes, between production and non-production, they have. Have they met a blast radius argument about one application being hacked and the other application not being impacted or compromised, one application being compromised, the other application not being compromised? In that case, because the production account is running all applications, they haven't. And that is fine, right? See, all things that we do, all decisions that we make have to be looked at from a perspective of what is acceptable risk. There's no right or wrong, right? I go out on the street, I am taking acceptable risk that I might be hit by a car or bitten by a dog, right? That is acceptable risk. There is nothing that we do risk-free. Okay, so it's all a matter of accepting risk and being aware of the risk. Not being aware of the risk is a very different thing.
Yeah, in this case, right, when you have the account 1 prod and 1 UAT, blast radius is controlled at application level with the VPC, right? Or is there any other?
Yeah, so you can control, see, VPCs are large network spaces. One application, depending on how you define your application, it may be enough for a VPC, or it might just be using like 2% of a VPC address space while everything is left empty. For large enterprises, that is not the most optimal usage of their IP address space. So in that case, the VPC which is holding production is running probably multiple services which comprise of the app, which make up the application.
Yep.
Some people have VPCs split by business units in the same account, right? Does that help from a cost attribution perspective? No, because it becomes really difficult. The easiest way is to have separate accounts for different business units at least. Don't mix things up. Otherwise, you will write so complex tagging that to identify this tag for this unit and that tag for that unit, and it'll just become super complex. So for large companies, one of the things that works is they have, and not have too many accounts, is that they have business units as, and we will define using AWS organization on how that looks like. But they have the top account, which is the one that we registered with the customer's ID and everything. Then we have business unit specific accounts. So every business unit gets a set of accounts. They might get a production account for BU1 that has a production account. They also have a dev account, a UAT account, and an experimentation account, where things are not as closely tied down, and they are allowed to make experiments and just throw away the experiment, right? The easiest way of throwing something away is just to close the account, right? You don't have to write delete scripts of deleting EC2 instance and this and that, deleting VPC. Just close the account. It is the simplest way of doing it. But then you have to be aware that when you close the account, everything is gone, right? And that's why doing these experimentation accounts is a great idea. Just create, someone wants to do an experiment, give them an account. Do the experiment, you're done with 5 days, you will close the account. Nothing will be left consuming cost or anything, or even a hacking, giving you an extra hacking service. Just close the account, right? So so that was the structure. Every business unit gets a set of accounts. Now we are talking about a multi-account structure. Top account, sets of accounts, different sets of accounts. BU1 has a set of accounts, BU2 has a set of accounts for a large organization. And different production accounts, each BU has their own production account as well. So production segregation is there. Utilization of IP address space is also good because one BU has multiple applications. They are probably in the same VPC, can be. If they don't want it, it's fine. Another VPC is fine. It is your problem to solve the IP address space issue, utilization issue. Maybe you use very small VPCs. The smallest that I remember was what, /28? No, /28 is the smallest subnet that you can use. Right? So those are the kind of decisions that you have to take, and there's no right and wrong, at least in that particular, whether you want one VPC or two. Right? You will have to sort out your connectivity between VPCs, but that's not a problem. You can do it via transit gateways. You should not do it via VPC peering, because then it is a mesh. And getting that full mesh connectivity is a big maintenance problem. So getting it via transit gateway, which is a hub and spoke model, is much better.
So this is coming back to the e-commerce example now. So now that we know the benefit of the multi-account structure and how it helps the organization. So the cloud architects or the cloud engineers, so now they are about to set up a multi-account landing zone. So you helped us to know that you can go by organization units, like every business unit, and then from there you can drill down by environment level. So if you could help us to know how would these people would start, like is there a structure, is there a set of activities they have to start writing down somewhere?
Yeah. So again, taking a step back, you mentioned the word control tower and you mentioned landing zone. So what is a landing zone? How do we explain it to people who don't have a technical background or who are new to this?
Absolutely.
Right.
And on top of that, the another curiosity question is, what is this multi-account landing zone and control tower? Are they both refers to the same, or they are two different things? Yes, absolutely.
Right. Okay. So let's first talk about what came first. What came first was landing zone. Now, landing zone is not a service in AWS at least. Right. Landing zone is an idea. Right. Or if you're technical enough, landing zone is a technical from a development perspective. Landing zone is a class, and control tower is the object. Right. It's an implementation of a class. The other example that I can give you is toothpaste is the landing zone, and the Pepsodent gel or some other toothpaste of your liking is the control tower. So toothpaste is the idea of what it can be. The control tower is the brand of that toothpaste, an actual implementation that you buy on the street. Now, what is control tower? If you have to understand control tower, think of your condo in Singapore or any other region, right? A condominium. What that condominium has is multiple towers. Each tower has multiple flats. The tower, the condominium has a shared security, right? You don't talk to different security people managing different towers. There's an outside perimeter security, then there is an inside perimeter security, right? Then there is central security footage cam of figuring out who is doing what, at least outside. Right? I'm sure they don't track it inside the house, but at least outside there's central stuff. There is central plumbing, right? You don't have individual plumbing companies taking care of plumbing for different towers or different houses. So you provide a set of shared structure and allow people to live safely and freely in the condo. You transfer that same logic to AWS, you get a landing zone. The landing zone is the concept, right? There is the general idea is that you will have certain shared things, you will have certain independent things, and the shared things will be managed centrally. And independent things, you will have your own freedom to do whatever you want to do. Right? So landing zone is the idea. Now, when we created the landing zone idea, we did an implementation as well, but that was not an AWS service. So we wrote a bunch of CloudFormation templates where we were very prescriptive in how the VPC could look like, what are the shared accounts. So in the original landing zone implementation of that idea, there was a networking account, there was a shared service account, there was an operational account, there was log and audit was not there. And then you get all these separate, and these accounts multiplied by 2 because you get one for prod and one for non-prod. So 6 accounts were there, plus the top account, which was the main account. So 7 accounts total. And then you get n number of accounts, as many as you want. These are the application accounts created by business units, production, non-production, and all of that. So these many accounts were were created as part of the implementation of the landing zone. Right? You can continue with that same example of the condo. Some condos have two plumbing units. Some condos have 2 towers. Some condos have 50 towers. Right? So it is how you implement that idea. So that was our initial implementation, but that was not an AWS service. Then the team decided that we need to simplify this, and this whole setup could potentially take, execution of scripts does not take time, but figuring out all the requirements and everything could potentially take time on how your networking is going to be and stuff like that. And then there was a blockade, not blockade, but there was some friction in terms of adoption, because you have to be technically super savvy to be able to execute these CloudFormation templates. Now the implementation of landing zone, which is called Control Tower, which is a centrally managed AWS service. You can, when you go to the console, I can share it. I can show it to you. You search for Control Tower, it ends up in a service like you go to S3 or EC2. And within 2 clicks and 2 email addresses, you can set up the AWS definition of a landing zone, which is called Control Tower. Right? The provisioning of Control Tower by AWS takes anywhere between 45 to 60 minutes, sorry, not that fast, 45 to 60 minutes. But that gives you a baseline setup of certain core security. Like in the condo example, we have the outside perimeter security. We also want resources which are provisioned for Control Tower itself, not the S3 bucket that I want for my application, or the EC2 instance that I want for my application. Any resources that Control Tower creates, it protects is using service control policies. And we can talk about what kind of policies are service control policies, or again, why do we need service control policies? And then what you get at the end of the day, after those 60 minutes have passed, you started with one account, which was your root account. At the end of 60 minutes, you get two more accounts. One is called the security account / audit account. Sorry, security account, audit account, and log archive account. So you get these two accounts. The audit account is nothing but the security account, the original security account in the original implementation of landing zone. And the log archive account is a separate account which is supposed to store your logs. Now the why question is, why do you need a separate account to store my logs? Right? Again, back to why questions. Why do we need a separate account to store my logs? Any thoughts on why should we have separate account to store my logs?
To have single source of logs
But
for all the logs.
single source of logs, I could have used one of the. So okay, fair enough.
This landing zone
To
that you
provide
made
more security.
is
Okay,
Is
one
the-
by one. So, okay, so Naveen, you go first. You said single source of log. Okay, then Nitin, you were saying something.
yeah. So Joe, what I'm thinking is, see, the landing zone itself is like a hybrid architecture, right? So where 50% of the resources, or let's say 70%, are AWS controlled, and 30% would be user controlled. So tomorrow, if something goes wrong, it will be easy to identify, and the ownership would be clearly defined. I think that's my thought.
Okay, so you are saying ownership, that's a centralized log. Then on the chart, Rian C said not to tamper the logs. Okay, Sneha Raj said easy to manage. Anyone else? Anybody from the audience?
To provide more security, like anyone cannot be accidentally delete that logs or do anything with the logs.
So what will happen is segregation of duties, right? When somebody is making some changes, even its production or dev environment, and somebody can deny that I haven't made changes. That's why they have a one shared account, or not shared account. It should be a service account for logs, and audit security team will have access to the logs only, because they're the team who can do an audit, and they're the team who represent the auditors also. Then they can find out who is playing around with the resources.
Right.
The culprit will be catched.
Correct. See, I'll try to give the wrong solution first and tell you the problems with the wrong solution, because these are architectural choices that have been made by people who have been doing this for a very long time. And there are no right or wrong solutions, but these are improvements on the earlier problems. These are improvements on the solutions that were earlier done by people. Right. So let's try to find out what were the problems in the original solution. Assuming that you have a multi-account structure in a landing zone that you yourself created, you did whatever you thought was right. No one tries to knowingly do the wrong stuff, but you did what was thought was right. What you did was, as part of your 10 account structure, assuming you had 10 accounts, you allowed people to store their own CloudTrail logs in their own accounts. So everyone enabled CloudTrail in their own account, and the logs were stored in a bucket in that same account. Fine. CloudTrail is enabled, good practice. Now you at least have a log of who did what and when. That is essentially what CloudTrail does. And after the event has happened, it is not a preventive thing. After the event has happened, that action, which is an AWS API action, not an application action, an AWS API action will get logged in CloudTrail. Fine. Cost-wise also it is fine. First trail in any account is free. So you just enable that. You don't have to pay for anything. That log is being tracked in the same account. Totally fine. No problem. Problem starts when there was an issue or there was an account hack. Someone who was a rogue administrator or a person who got access to administrator keys, I'm using the word administrator keys lightly, assuming that that person has access to do something with CloudTrail. If that person gets access to CloudTrail, the first thing that an intelligent hacker would do is go to CloudTrail, stop logging, do the hacky business, and then enable logging again. No one will know that something wrong happened because there is no audit trail, right? So you will only know after the fact that someone realized, okay, my configurations have changed, or EC2 instances have been shut down, or this account was used to exfiltrate some data from my account to some other place. But there is no, you can figure it out, but there is no track of who did what and when. And if someone is much more malicious, they will just stop the logging or just delete the CloudTrail itself, right? They are the admins, so-called. They will delete the CloudTrail, delete everything, delete your data, delete your backup, delete EC2 instances, delete your networking setup in the account, everything. And then just go, right? Can you track them? No, you can't. Because the CloudTrail was deleted first. The old trails, old data was also deleted. There is no audit. So that is a problem, right? Now, the question is, how do we solve that problem? There are two problems to solve here. First of all, first problem is that we have to solve this problem across 10 accounts or 20 accounts or 5,000 accounts. Okay, that problem. Yeah, so Nitin asked, could this have not been overcome by setting organization? So see, organization is just a logical collection of AWS accounts. Nothing else. It does not do anything within AWS accounts. What it allows is a framework for other services to work on top of organizations. For example, in the same example that I was giving, you could only do CloudTrail earlier at an account level. Then CloudTrail team got a feature request, mostly from customers, saying that we don't want to set this up at an account level because we have a shared security team. We don't have an account level security team. We don't have a business unit level security team. We have a shared security team. We have a shared audit team. We have a shared compliance team. We want to be able to set this up at a central place, not in those 5,000 accounts one by one. CloudTrail team got that feature request. CloudTrail team would have created something called as cloud organization level CloudTrail. What that does is it enables CloudTrail at an organization level. It is not an AWS organization feature. It's a CloudTrail feature leveraging the organization's framework. CloudTrail now is enabled at an organization level. What that means is you enable it once, you specify the bucket in some account that you own as part of the organization, and CloudTrail will log everything happening in all of these accounts in that S3 bucket. Now it solves quite a few problems. It solves the operational problem of setting CloudTrail up properly in 5,000 accounts or 2 accounts. You enable it once, it takes care of everything. Second problem that it solves is, even if you are the administrator of your account, you are not an administrator of that account where the logs are stored. So you can protect your logs much more. Plus now there is an audit trail because no one has access to those logs. Those logs are technically immutable. From a compliance perspective, you can prove that no one had access to those logs, even if something was done, right? How do you protect those logs, first of all? Then how do you protect those logs? You can set up a policy, and we are not talking about how Control Tower does it. We are just doing a normal mental solutioning on that particular problem. We are saying that I have to protect one S3 bucket in some account. How can I do that? And by protection, I mean write once, never delete. Right? You can read it as many times, but you can't modify it. So you have to protect that S3 bucket. You can write policies. You can write service control policies, which allow very little access. You can have no IAM users created in that account. You can have no permission sets associated with that account, apart from a very restricted set of people. And even those people do not have access to delete stuff. There's a deny policy applied. You can't override a deny policy. A deny policy always wins. Right? You can do whatever mishmash of policies you want at different levels. If there is a deny policy, it will always trump any allow policy. You can be administrator in your own house, But if there is a deny that you can't enter that room in your house, you can't enter. Whether you have the papers, registry papers, everything, if there's a deny policy, you can't do anything. Okay. Now, taking that idea and implementing it in an AWS service is what Control Tower does. Control Tower takes that idea of a central CloudTrail. It enables it at the organization level. It puts the bucket of where the logs are stored in the log archive account, and it protects it with service control policies that you should not be able to delete this bucket or tamper with this bucket. That kind of a thing where you're preventing stuff from happening is called a preventive control. There are two other kinds of control. There's a preventive control, there's a detective control, and then there is a corrective control. And this is a general thing. It's not an AWS specific terminology, preventive, detective, corrective. But there are different implementations of it. So preventive controls are done generally by IAM policies, service control policies, right? Corrective control, detective controls are done by things like AWS config. So you change a bucket, you change a security group, you say allow 0.0/0 from on port 80, and you have a config rule, it will detect that you have done such business, and it can inform other people based on the integrations that you can just configure, sending an email via SNS or SES, for example, SNS essentially. Detective controls is done by a combination of config and other services. So you can actually write Lambda function, which will be triggered by AWS config invocation, saying that if someone opens a security group to everyone in the world, trigger a Lambda function, and within, let's say, 2 seconds, your security group will automatically get closed. Right? So you don't have to wake up someone at 2 a.m. in the night when someone was creating security groups. All this can be automated. Right?
So taking a slightly a bit of break while continuing the flow, Vishesh, to the community group. How many of you so far in the group joined first time here, but you are not part of a larger Telegram group where I am the moderator? Anyone here first time? Raise your hand. Okay, that's good. So okay, there is one, first one. So I think okay, there is second one. So I will share with you our group YouTube video and the rules and regulations. So if you are okay, then you can join the group. It's a very different group. So I will share with you. The second question, Vishesh, is how did you get into cloud? Slightly a break from the flow, and then we will get into the flow part.
Can I take a 30-minute bathroom break and come back?
Absolutely.
Cool, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so while we are waiting for Vishesh from his break, let me share with you on the chart where is our group.
Joe, sorry I joined late and I butted in with the questions. I didn't know the rules. Sorry about that.
No. I'm talking about the first timer who are going to join our Telegram group. That's what I'm talking about. So I think there are two people who are not part of the group. So I am going to copy link. And here is the link. If you are not part of the group, watch this video. If you okay, then follow the steps. It will give you Cloud and DevOps Babies equivalent control tower.
Nice one.
Sure.
Joe, one question, Joe. I came in a bit late. Joe, how would this control tower be different from an a hybrid cloud model where I would have some resources at my data center and some at AWS. And
I can answer that. I can answer that.
sorry,
I
Vishesh,
was
I
just,
joined in late, so apologies if you had
no,
explained
no,
this.
we haven't reached that far.
Okay, then I'll wait for it. It's fine.
And please just remind me before I end the session today, I will answer that question. So that's a very important question to answer.
Thank you.
Okay, so why did or how did I start my cloud journey, right?
Yeah.
Right. I will not make up stories. Right? I will tell you the truth how I started. It was 2013. I was back from London. I was back to India. I was in my company. There was no new project at that point of time. So I was asked to run the internal tools team. So I was the lead architect at that time. And we had a contract with AWS. I mean, AWS was obviously pushing for people to get knowledgeable on AWS, which is what they should. So my deputy IT head, he asked me, sir, there is a training. Why don't you go there? And he was very serious. So, but that's how things are. People speak in Bangalore. He addressed me as sir. I was very junior to him. But he asked me, sir, there's a training. Why don't you go there? And I thought, okay, let's go there. There'll be good food. And there'll be 3 days of training, no work as such. So I said yes. So that was the associate architect, AWS associate architect training. Sorry, there is
somebody's playing a music.
Somebody, let me put on mute.
I think we are okay now.
Yep.
Okay. So that was the discussion. So I went there. I did my training. It was a good training. I came back. I didn't do anything. Absolutely nothing. Right. And then the IT head actually asked me that, okay, you went for the training. What have you done with it?
I think, Virat, can you put on mute? Okay.
Yeah. So he asked me, what have you done with it? And I said, nothing. He said, at least get certified. I mean, you have done a certification training, get certified. So that was 2014. And then when I started to study, I thought that I will remember. I absolutely remembered nothing from that training. It was like 2-3 months after that training. I absolutely remembered nothing. But then I studied. That was when 2014 was when I did my first associate certification. That's how I got into AWS. Now, after doing that certification, we were essentially a Microsoft shop. So everything was Azure, Azure, Azure. But then the demand from the market was all AWS, AWS, AWS. So since I was certified and I was probably the only one in that company who was AWS certified, I used to get a lot of pre-sales work. Whether we won the contract at the end of the day or not is a separate question. But we got a lot of pre-sales work. And that's how I started solutioning things on AWS. Right? And that's how I started.
Very nice journey, Vishesh. I think you are the lucky one to get into cloud way back in 2013, 2014. And then some of us, and that's where the whole concept of group started. When we started late, around 2019. And then that's where, when I started the group, around the world, there are around 1,200 people are there in the group. Most of us, except few, are late into this game. And then when we got into this, then the learning started. And thank you for your help and coming forward, helping us like a community group. We had all these curiosity questions. When we used to learn from cloud, we always had this curiosity question. The challenge was at that time, there was no one who was actually guiding us in the right way. Although there are, as you said rightly, lot of how part is there in the Google or on the video courses on all those things. But none of us were getting the guidance like today we are getting is why part. Like you said that, there is a detective control, preventive control, and corrective control. Okay, we didn't know about this, that there are ways. And then technically in one account, you can do everything. Why do you need multiple accounts? Okay, and what can go wrong? Some of the things which you have said, these are the things actually helping. And this is my objective as a moderator of the group, is to share the real practical knowledge with the community so they can take it away and sort of get benefit. And thank you once again for your time. And despite of the vacation you are right now, until all the way till January, helping us. And then to the audience, today's session is why part, but Visesh is going to help us to show us the demo part, which is the how part. So the why and the how, when you combine this together, you won't find this, what Visesh is sharing. Trust me, and I can guarantee you won't find it in any course. You won't find it in any Google. When you do a Googling also, you won't find these kind of things. The operational expertise from experience, it only comes from Visesh, who has done in and out, and he has been like for the last 7 years with cloud, listening to that thought process is going to help you all. So once again, thank you, Visesh. So that was a slightly bit of a break on the flow. I can go back to the flow now.
So we were doing service control policies, right? There's nothing fancy about service control policies. Now, how are they different than, let's say, IAM policies? They essentially set the boundary in which you can play, right? So let's say you are a football player, right? You are super good. You can play, you can kick with both feet, and you can do all sorts of magic with your feet, right? But you apply a service control policy which says that from tomorrow you can't play with your left feet, right? And no matter how good you are, you're still that good. You can't use your left feet going forward. That is the impact of service control policy. It's generally used in deny situations. Now, examples of service control policies are, you can say that you will only be allowed to create resources in the Singapore region, because that is where your users are. That is where your IT policy states that resources should be created. Why should you be allowed to create resources in US East 1? Right? So you can apply that service control policy. You can apply us, and that essentially reduces your playing field. Now you're tied to Singapore. There's nothing fancy instances, fancy, very complicated, very expensive instances running in another region. And that should be absolutely fine. You can have service control policies that no instances can be left unencrypted. So you can have a service control policy which says, fail all create actions of EC2 instances which have encryption missing or not enabled, right? Or you might be an administrator in any account which is governed by that service control policy. You will not be able to create an instance without enabling encryption, or S3 bucket for that matter. Right? You might have full permission on that account, allow star all resources. You will not be able to override that service control policy. Right? Why did we create it? We have created it because we got requirements from customers saying that we need to be able to manage such things centrally. Now the question becomes, how do we apply these service control policies? And I'll use SCPs just to be precise. How do we apply these SCPs, or where do we apply these SCPs? SCP can be applied. So think of a hierarchy: root account, OU. OU is a logical entity. OU is not the same as AWS organizations. AWS organizations is a service. OU is a logical entity in an account structure, right? Think of the condominium example. You have one condominium, you have blocks of towers. So 3 towers together forms one block. And it might be as many towers as you want, but 3 towers together form one block, 4 towers here form another block, 6 towers here form another block. The block is not an actual place where someone lives. A block is a logical entity comprising of 3 towers. Correct? You don't enter a block and find something which is not in the tower. Tower is just a collection of block. It is a logical entity. It is the same thing with organization unit. You can't have an EC2 instance running in an organization unit. An EC2 instance has to run in an AWS account. That account can be a part of an organization unit. Okay, so the hierarchy is like this: root account, organization units, different organization units, how many ever you want. Each organization can have sub-organization units as well. or they can directly have accounts. So you can have this nested hierarchy. At all of these nodes of nested hierarchy, and to keep things simple, let's keep a 3-level hierarchy: root account, one organization unit level. You may have 3-4 organization units at the same level, and you have certain accounts underneath it. At each of these nodes, root account, organization unit, or at the account level, you can apply a service control policy. And if you apply a service control policy on top at the root account level, it will get inherited at each level, which means that if you apply a deny policy on the top root account, that deny policy will function as a proper deny policy on everything. So that is the kind of power that service control policy has, which means that at least at the top account, you can't have a lot of restrictions placed. Because if you have an experimentation account and you want to allow a lot of stuff, you can't have a very restrictive top level policy as a deny policy, because the experimentation account will also not work. So the best practice in that case is you have a generous allow policy on top, and then you start to tie it down at different levels. So a production OU can have a very tight control policy, service control policy. But the experimentation OU does not need to have that tight control policy. But if you want to so that essentially means that the policy has to be applied at the OU level here. Or if you just have one production account, you apply it at the account level itself. So this is the key power of service control policy and the key usage here. Any questions on service control policies? And they look very similar to IAM policies. There's nothing fancy about them. It's just how they are used and where they are applied. Because IAM policies are applied within the account. These are applied outside the account. So protecting the cover of the account itself.
One question is, okay, in case if root account have one service control policy that has been inherited to the organization OU level, but in case if OU have some additional SAP to be implemented, then how it will be applied? We need to create a separate SAP for that, or? Yeah,
so correct. So that's exactly how it will work. You correctly said that if you apply something at the root account, let's say you say delete actions are not allowed. Delete actions of EC2 is not allowed, right? It is a very not the most appropriate example, but let's say we apply that policy. So EC2 instance created once will never be allowed to be deleted. You apply that at the root account, it will get applied to everything, all OUs, all accounts under that OU. That's fine. But then in one of the accounts, you also want to say that delete of S3 buckets is not going to be allowed here. Right? Let's say in a log archive kind of an account scenario, you want to say that deletion of S3 buckets is not allowed. That is a new policy that you will write, and you will apply it either at the account level or at the OU, which is hosting that account.
Okay. Okay.
And then it is a union of all of these policies, which essentially get actually applied to that account.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
By default, the limit for SCPs is 5 at an OU level. But you can increase
okay,
that.
5 SCPs can be attached to an OU level.
But you can increase that. That's a soft limit.
Soft limit. Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you.
What else?
So when we create this landing zone, the SCPs are created as well, or?
Correct.
Okay.
Some SCPs are created. And
okay.
Like I said, right, Control Tower creates some resources, very few resources, but some resources. Okay. And Control Tower needs to have a way of protecting those resources. Let's say Control Tower creates a S3 bucket where your logs will be stored. Now Control Tower has to protect it. Otherwise, what's the whole point?
True.
Right. So it will use an SCP to protect that resource. It will use an SCP to protect the CloudTrail resource that it created. This organization-wide CloudTrail. So some SCPs it will create, which just protects these resources. My best guidance to such SCPs or anything that Control Tower creates is never change it. Because these are not useless SCPs. These are not very wide umbrella SCPs, like don't allow any deletions, right? It is not a practical SCP, especially when created by Control Tower, because Control Tower has no way of what every users in the world requirement will be. So its SCPs are very tied down to the very resources that Control Tower creates. And the reason why I said never change those is that Control Tower is a service. It is a version service. If you go to Control Tower in AWS or just Google Control Tower current version, it will tell you it is something .27. At least that's when I checked it was. And I think that has updated. So it updates its own versions. So tomorrow, if you modify a particular policy, next time the version comes, it will override that policy because that policy is not supposed to be updated by you. So any changes that you can technically do will be updated. So how do I get, the question becomes, okay, I also want my own service control policies, right?
Yes.
I'm okay with the ones that they have, but I want my own. Solution to that is you create your own and associate it whatever level you want it to associate it with.
Like we do that hardening, like CSI hardening and the like our internal hardening as well, adding more. Okay.
More policies.
Got it.
So the going forward, if you want to update the Control Tower version, can we do it, or it has been done automatically by the AWS?
No, you will have to do it. So
Okay, so
AWS
we'll have
will
options
say,
of updating or not updating.
correct. Then you essentially get nudged to update. There'll be new features that will be, let's say, in the 0.28 version, and AWS will say, okay, please update. It will not automatically update stuff for you because they understand that things are running inside Control Tower now.
Kumar,
Correct. Sorry. One more question related to that. Kumar, so for example, we are updating that. Is there any way to go back as a backout policy that something goes wrong, or
I don't think you can go back.
Okay, we don't.
Yeah, I don't think you can go back from, let's say, 28 to 27.
Correct. So there is no backout policy. So we have to make sure that that whatever changes we are doing, we know that that is what we are looking for.
Correct. And
perfect.
And there is a this is not a black box exercise where AWS says, okay, I've released 0.27 to 0.28, go update or not. AWS will list out things of changes that they have done. Now you see if those changes make sense for you.
Correct.
In most cases, they should, because as long as you don't alter those resources yourself, because then there is a conflict.
Correct. Perfect. Thank you.
Let's take Atit question.
Yeah. Hi. Kumar, how about the policies? If I have applied SCP at organization level, and I have a resource policy and identity policy also. The SCP is denied, but in resource and identity policy I have allowed. In that case, will that still deny or it will allow?
It is any deny trumps all allows. It doesn't matter. And SCPs especially are much more powerful. Okay, I'll give another example. Continue on the football player example. Let's say you're a football player, you play in a rectangular field, right? That's how football fields are, rectangular in nature. You can have a service control policy applied to that football field and say, now the football field will be circular. No matter how good a player you are, no matter how big the ground is, if the service control policy says you can only play in a 20 meter radius in a circular way, you can't get out of it.
Okay.
So service control policy, since they essentially do the boundary within which you can play. After, if you can't even go out of that boundary, it doesn't matter whose administrator you are, what permission, which king you are. This is your kingdom. You can only play within your kingdom.
How about cross account? For example, I have account A and account B. All right. And SCP on account B denies S3 whatever actions on S3, right? And a resource policy on the bucket in the account B allows account A. All right. And I have an identity policy to apply to some IAM user in account A that allows to use S3. So what would be the effect? What would be the effective access when identity user try to access the bucket in account B?
Short answer to all questions is
Deny.
that deny trumps all allows.
Uh,
You need something, you need 5 things to work, let's say, right? You need policies, bucket policies to be configured correctly. You need resource policies to be configured correctly. You need SCPs to be configured correctly. Let's say to reach some outcome, you need 5 things to be configured. If one of those 5 things is deny, it doesn't matter what the other 4 things are. Absolutely doesn't matter.
okay.
So it's an exam question as well, right? Let's say in a certification exam, they give you 3 policies and say what is the combined effect of these 3 policies. And 2 of those policies are super complex on resource IDs and this, that, permissions and all of these things. As soon as you see a deny on a resource which is a relevant resource, you don't even have to read the other 2 policies.
Okay.
Because the deny will trump it.
Okay. Maybe I need to try, because I tried this scenario. It allowed me to access the S3 resource from
Then there
other
is a problem
account.
with the policy.
Okay.
A deny is never trumped, because that then changes everything that we know about permissions and policies in AWS.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Thanks, Vishesh.
Thank you. Nitin, there is a question.
Yes. So when I joined in, right, and like I apologize for joining in it, you were saying that this landing tower control, or the control tower, it's built over CloudFormation templates. That's the foundation block for it. So are these okay? Maybe I thought you wanted to correct me there.
Yeah. So the original implementation of the landing zone concept was done using CloudFormation templates. And why CloudFormation templates? Because that is the language of choice in AWS to define resources.
Okay. So now is it still the same or no? Now it's changed.
Internally, yes, but it also uses something called a service catalog, which is nothing but a packaging around CloudFormation templates.
Correct. So are these templates customizable or no?
The templates which are used for provision of resources by AWS Control Tower technically are customizable, but you should never customize them, because that whole override logic comes into picture.
And then, as you subsequently said, the subsequent upgrades might fail.
Correct. Subsequent updates might fail, number 1. Number 2, your changes that you overrid and thought are good changes will get overwritten and you will be back to square 1.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Any new resources that you want to create, you create within your own CloudFormation templates or anything like that. That is absolutely fine. Think of Control Tower as an empty house with plumbing in place and
Separate security
in place.
zone.
Yeah. The basic plumbing is there. There is water coming into the house. There is electricity provided in the house, but there is no sofa and all. That sofa and all you have to bring yourself. Sofa, bed, almirahs, clothes, everything. Those are your applications. All that you have to do.
Just like a bare shelf. That's what we call
It's
in
a bare
Mumbai.
shelf, but utilities are provided.
Correct. You customize it as per your own. But the shelf is the structure is what you decide.
Security, basic security is enabled. Basic guardrails are enabled. There are recommended guardrails also that you can enable. All that is just customizations. One way of doing customizations. But basic stuff is there. It's not a place where you can't even go and live. And basic utilities are provided. Okay. Now let me try to answer the hybrid solution. Can someone, whoever asked that question, please repeat that?
It was me. So I asked you, I said, how is the landing zone different as compared to if I wanted to do a hybrid cloud, like, part AWS and part mine? Because as you rightly said, certain elements are purely controlled by AWS and there is a play area which I have of my own. So.
Okay. Good question. I'm glad you asked it, because a lot of people might have this question. Control Tower-based landing zone only governs the part in AWS. In all projects that I work on with customers, it enables the hybrid cloud solution. It is just the story which defines the AWS side of things. It has nothing to do with the hybrid side of things. So if a customer like the e-commerce company that we were fictitiously working with, if they want a hybrid cloud solution, because they will continue to have some workloads on their on-premise environment, and they want to move some of their workloads to AWS. The solution, the logical flow of things will be that we will advise the customer to create an AWS control tower-based landing zone that will govern the resources and give structure to resources in AWS. We will create a networking account in that control tower. So a networking account is no simple account, is actually a very simple account. It's just like any other account, just that you put your networking resources in that particular account. And why do we do it? Because there is a separate networking team, which is different from the application team, which is different from the security team. We want to give them only access to the things that they need and not give access to everything else, and vice versa. We create an account for them. There's a networking account now. You will create your networking resources in that account. You set up a VPN connection or a direct connect connection between your on-prem environment to that networking account. Your transit gateway is placed in that networking account, and you connect that transit gateway to your different VPCs. So you have a hybrid cloud solution which is enabled by Control Tower. Control Tower has no objections to hybrid cloud solutions. It is enabling hybrid cloud solutions. It is enabling all AWS solutions. It is just how things can be done in AWS. It has no fight with a hybrid cloud solution. It is enabling all of those scenarios. Does that make sense, Nitin?
Yes, it does. It puts in a lot of things into perspective. But I think just elaborating on it, and so is hybrid cloud actually the way to go ahead, or it's purely down to customer specific workloads? And what do you think? Like, where do you foresee this?
Right. So this is a broader question. Is hybrid cloud the way to go ahead? It is definitely the way to get started. See, if you're a company right now which has 10,000 applications and 50,000 servers running on-prem, or choose whatever number works for you, you can't move all of them on day one, right? So your day one essentially is a hybrid cloud solution. What your day 1000 looks like depends on what are your requirements, right? Your requirement might be that I don't want to run anything out of my data center. I want to migrate everything to AWS. Maybe after day 1000 or day 500, you will have everything running in AWS. But on day one, your solution is a hybrid cloud solution, because there is no other way about it. You can't migrate everything on any day. Forget day one. You can't migrate everything on day 50 also. Right? So your hybrid cloud solution is day one. And it is true for all companies which have anything running anywhere, on-prem, some other cloud. Hybrid cloud is the solution that we have to go with. Maybe after 300 days or 1000 days, you say, okay, everything is now moved. I don't even need a VPN connection because there's nothing to connect to, right? I've closed down my data centers. That is fine. In that case, you are no longer a hybrid cloud operator. You are an all-in AWS operator. And that is absolutely fine.
Thank you so much. I think what your candid answer on this one, I think it's moved us away and given us a practical insight into what actually would happen. Because if you do these courses, right, in the courses they tend to paint the picture that right from day one you're in a fully cloud mode. But the way you've described it in phases, I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So the two questions which I want to check is, when you create the control tower and it will create the objects inside this, are there any objects that are billable?
Yes, good question, right? And I'm completely happy to say that some resources are billable, but let's talk about those resources. CloudTrail is created, right? Assuming that you don't have existing CloudTrails, it's a brand new control tower in a brand new account. First, CloudTrail is free. Okay, so CloudTrail is free. Resources are there, but that resource is free. S3 bucket. S3 bucket is there, but bucket itself is free. You pay for the data amount of data you store. That too, there is a free tier. If you don't run anything within that, if you run anything which stores data and it stays within that free tier, it is free. Plus, if you use how much data will you put in S3, which are audit events. So if you think about it, this is not an application sending data to S3 in GBs per minute, right? This is audit logs of your AWS activity, not even application activity. So things like EC2 create instance will get logged in their S3 bucket. But then how big is that entry anyways? So that technically remains free for a very long time. AWS config rules are created, right, which protects or detects changes to these things. Now those are charged, but there is a free tier there as well, right? So at the end of the day, the cost of running Control Tower is like, for small companies or initial stages, is like $5-10 or something, or even not that, right? So there's nothing. Accounts are free. And you have 10 accounts, you have 5,000 accounts. The account itself, creation of an account itself is not charged. The resources within the account that are created are essentially what makes up your bill. Guard duty. Guard duty is another one. Guard duty is the one which actually, if I say, let's say there is a $10 cost, most of that will be guard duty. Because guard duty will have to be enabled on all of these accounts, which essentially means that guard duty, but it's a very minimal cost. Because guard duty is an AI driven service, it's not a usage driven service.
Now these accounts are created, let's say network account or security account, right? Will anybody log in to the console or use exactly that account to log in? And in such case, how the first time login will happen? How the credentials will be shared to those two?
Okay, so all roads to any account related activity start from the root account, because that is your only entry point. That is the only username and password that you got, email and password actually, right? So that has to be your entry point. Now, when we created AWS Control Tower, and I'll do this how part of the session the next time, but when you create the AWS Control Tower, you get two new accounts, log archive account and the audit account. Now, let's say you have to log in as the root account itself. We have not created any users. We have not done anything fancy. You have to log in. The only way to log in from one account to the other is using these cross account roles. So what happens essentially is Control Tower while creating, when you're creating Control Tower, what gets created is these cross account roles, and there is a specific name for a role, which I don't remember. It is a very similar name to, it's exactly the same concept as the AWS organization account access role. So if you use the organization API and create a child account, you need credentials to access into that child account first time, at least. That is done via the organization account access role. That gives, you assume that role from one account into the other, all that plumbing is automatically done. Same thing happens in Control Tower. You assume that particular role, there is a fixed name that is given. You assume that role in that account, and then you, if you want, you create identities, IAM users, IAM roles, IAM groups in that account, and then use that. Should you do it? No. First time access just to see whether everything is created fine or not, that's absolutely fine. But you should always look at centralizing identity across all your accounts. You don't want to get into a situation where you have IAM users created, hard-coded access keys, secrets keys created across these accounts, which never expire. You should never go into that trap. You can create IAM users. Anytime you are creating IAM users, ask yourself, do I have a workflow? And this is a security thing. This is nothing to do with Control Tower. Ask yourself, do you have a workflow which is foolproof enough that this user number one, as soon as he leaves the company, this IAM credentials will be gone. Or he leaves the team, or he doesn't need access, these credentials will be gone. The answer to that question is, people give very long-winded answers. The answer essentially is no. That guy leaves on a Friday, no one is going to remove his credentials on a Monday, if at all they remember. Right? Onboarding, everyone writes down 10 steps to onboard. Give him laptop, give him this, give him laptop bag, give him access keys and all of that. Deboarding process is very much up in the air, which means that once that guy has left on a Friday, he still has access to your AWS account. And who knows in which mood did he leave, right? So there has to be a process that, and this IAM user credentials are not tied to your Active Directory credentials. These are AWS specific credentials. Anytime you create IAM users, you should be really scared.
And
Right.
Vishesh, one more question. Okay, whenever a new account is created by a control tower, is that AWS free tier will be applicable from enterprise? Okay.
Applicable.
Vishesh Machu here. One quick question on the control tower automation. I mean, is it possible to configure control tower using CloudFormation templates or any kind of automation? I mean, is there any possibility of doing some kind of continuous integration for the account setup?
Yes. So the answer is yes and no. It is one of the rare services within AWS which you currently cannot configure for the first time using CloudFormation.
Oh, okay.
For the
first time you have to do it manually.
First time you have to do it manually. The account creation process, see, control tower setup itself is a one-time job. Takes 45 to 60 minutes. It's a one-time job. Sit on a computer, type in 2 email addresses, click button twice, and done. That's all essentially there is. There is nothing. I mean, there are 2 fields only. It doesn't give you 20 fields, of which 2 are mandatory. It only gives you 22 fields. Right? So there's no thinking essentially that needs to be done.
Okay.
Once the control tower is set up, further work of setting up a networking account, configuring transit gateways, configuring single sign-on, all that is CloudFormation driven. Can be CloudFormation driven, can be Terraform driven, can be CDK driven, can be whatever driven you want. New account creation process, account vending machine is done via service catalog. So service, if you can invoke service catalog however you want, go ahead and do that. No problem. Any resource provisioning, anything that needs to happen can be as automated as you want it to be. Just that the control tower setup, that first time initial setup and first time and the only time setup is currently done by the console.
Okay. But is it true that I cannot use nested organizational units in control tower?
Good question. Currently, from what I remember, it currently does not support nested OUs. So within AWS organization, you can have this hierarchy. The top level OU, which is the root OU.
Yeah.
Then you can have BU1 as one OU. And under BU1, you can have sub OU called production and
sub
non-production.
OU. Yeah, correct.
Right?
Yeah.
Control tower currently does not work with nested OUs, but it is on the roadmap.
But if I create the top level OU first, the root OU first, after that, if I try to configure the control tower, it will only work for that top level OU, is it? It will not work for the sub OUs, is it?
So if you think like that, with that logic, it works with two level OUs, the root OU and one level below OU, but you can't go 3 levels.
Oh, okay.
And one more important thing.
That's a current limitation, which currently.
So it's a current limitation. I would not shy away from calling it a limitation, but it is on the roadmap.
Okay,
right?
okay. Because we were trying to, because we were trying to use organizational nested organizational units But then later we realized that control tower can only go up to the first level. But yeah, now I can hear that I can go up to the second level.
Second
OU
level.
as well.
So, yeah. So root and one level below is absolutely fine.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now I'll tell you, till the time AWS releases that feature of nested support for nested OUs, like proper nested OUs, what can be done? Because it's not a new problem that we are hearing for the first time. Right? So we asked the customers our question, why do you need OUs anyways currently? General answer is that logical flow of the organization wants to be depicted in that particular setup, which is absolutely fine, right? There's no denying that fact. But then sometimes, and there was a customer that I was working for like 2-3 months ago, they had a 3-level structure. So there was this top level, the BU level, and then there was one sub BU kind of a level. I went and checked at the sub BU level, there was no service control policy applied. Nothing. The only good reason for an OU, or actually the only 2 good reasons for an OU is one, that logical visibility of segregating stuff, and the actual benefit is service control policies.
But how about like in case if we want to have different segregation of the billing, or if we want to say that, okay, different entities within the organization want to know what is their billing and how much do they consume,
Hold that thought. Hold that thought, but that is not a control tower problem. But I will
that's
answer
organization. That. Yeah, that's a OU level.
It's not even OU level problem. I will answer that. Just repeat that question once I finish this example.
Sure. Okay.
In that, with that customer, I saw that there was no service control policy applied at the SBU level. It was just a logical grouping below the BU. What I recommended to the customer was that when you move things to control tower, I tried to flatten the 3-level structure, root, BU, sub BU, to a 2-level structure which control tower works with. I said, you continue to have root, you don't have a choice. That's absolutely fine. The second level, instead of calling it BU and then 1 level below SBU, just call it BU hyphen SBU. BU1 hyphen SBU1, BU1 hyphen SBU2. So you are essentially merging the last 2 levels, BU and SBU, into a flat level. And that is just a logical naming, because anyways, you don't have any SCPs applied at the SBU level. So you continue to see the visible grouping of accounts without actually creating any problem for you.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, that was one. The other thing I want to be very clear about is control tower based landing zone can be created even after you have existing accounts, existing stuff running in an account. It is not a day one thing that you can only do on day one, and after you created the first EC2 instance, nothing of this can work. Right? And in the subsequent sessions, I will take you through scenarios in which different kinds of scenarios, right? All customers have all very different peculiar scenarios. How do we handle these scenarios for different customers? And it all goes down to very basic questioning to customers. Why do you want it? It's always a why question. Very rarely it's a how question. So once you ask why sufficient number of times, you will go to the root of the problem. And then you just try to solve the root of the problem. Don't try to solve the problem which the customer asks you to solve. We call it a very customer obsessed mindset. We don't try to give what the customer really wants. We try to give what the customer really needs. And sometimes what they're asking for is far more complicated than it needs to be. And it's not their fault. It is their understanding of the problem. What we try to do is to try to go to the root of that problem and just try to solve the root of the problem, because they ask us to solve the manifestations of the problem. How does the problem look? What we try to solve for is what is the root of that manifestation itself. And you will be very excited to hear the examples and the complicated scenarios that customers come with. and the simple answers that we come up with to solve the root of the problem. And that is actually my personal kind of problems to solve. I don't like to create complex solutions to complex problems. If I can simplify the problem and if I can solve for that, that is the most optimum outcome that I can have. Because a complex solution means a complex and a very expensive operational life cycle for that solution. Right? But if you have a simple solution, it doesn't have to be day-to-day complex. Okay, and now there was another question around costing. If you can repeat that, please.
No, I was just saying that the main one of the important reasons for having organization units and sub-organization units is probably to have the different billing for different BUs or different groups, right? So if we have like 2-level or 3-level of OUs, then it'll make it easier. But if we merge the BU and SBU, then probably it'll be a little bit complicated for charge back to the different BUs, different SBUs.
In that case, I would say that I did not do a very good job in explaining that particular scenario.
No, I understood what you meant, like BU hyphen SBU. I mean,
No.
There's a bit of
The
a
original
manual.
costing part. The original costing part. Setting things up in a nested hierarchy has no binding on your costing. Does not give you any benefits on costing. Because costing is done, I mean, visually, if you want to see, costing is done in Cost Explorer in the master account. Oh, sorry, root account. I mean, we don't call it master account anymore. Call it root account. In that root account, whether account is part of BU1 or BU2 or under an SBU1 has no impact. There is no grouping based on that, at least not currently. Right? What I initially wanted to say or convey to you was that there are cases when customers want to use one landing zone, one actual payer account to AWS, but internally do a chargeback to their different business units and say, okay, here is your cost and here is their cost. But that has no impact on this BU-based or OU-based structure. Nothing.
Okay, sure. I understand. Correct.
Okay. How are we doing for time? How many people do we have on the call right now?
We still have about 36 people. Let's see if how many people have the questions.
Can I just request everyone, if possible, and it's not a big request, especially if everyone does it. There is a feedback form that I have pasted. It is an Amazon feedback form, right? But it only asks for your name, email, company name, your rating, and any context around the feedback. If I can ask you to take 1 minute just to provide your feedback, doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be anything fancy. That will really help me out in improving any further sessions and just seeing how I do in these sessions and improving my delivery of these sessions as well.
That's all. I mean, it's fair enough. We will do it. It's our you can say responsibility.
Yeah. So if you can take 1 minute to fill it now, I will be happy to engage in any questions in the meantime.
Yeah, so anybody has any questions, you can go, and while others, maybe you can start filling up. No questions? So let me ask this. So we gone through in brief on SCP and IAM policy, right? So there are two other things, guardrail and guard duty. That also where you apply few policies, right? How it differs when you compare with SCP?
Right. Okay. So they do different things, right? Think of a chef who uses different knives to do different things. Right? You don't use the same knife. I mean, especially if you're a proper chef. Like when I cook, I use the same knife to do everything. But if you're a proper chef, you have different knives to do different things. Now, SCPs is the purpose that SCPs serve is very different from the purpose that Guardrail serves, which is very, very different from the purpose that CloudTrail serves. Would you like to understand the difference on what these things serve? Prabhu, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
Yeah. In what way these, rather, let's say, at what level we can apply this? Or
Level
what
as in organization level?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. SCPs are applied at the nodes of the organization structure. And when I say nodes, it is just a fancy way of saying you can either apply it at root account or an OU level or at an account level.
Yeah.
Only three nodes, three kinds of nodes here. Policies related to guard duty are essentially applied within the account. And policies related to CloudTrail are, think of CloudTrail as just the, like I explained the purpose of CloudTrail, who did what and when. Right? That's about it. Do you need policies with the central organization CloudTrail? You don't, because you apply it at the organization level. It is enabled at an organization level. Then it sets up cross-account trust and all of that to actually get data from all these accounts and send it to a central trail. But there are no special policies that need to be applied.
The guardrail, there is a concept of guardrail, right?
See, guardrail is again that it's a concept of a guardrail. Guardrail is not an actual thing. You see your children having learning to cycle, right? The guardrail for them is those two extra small tire wheels that are along with the two main wheels. That is a guardrail. It stops them from falling when they don't know how to cycle. Once they know how to cycle, you remove those two extra wheels and you remove the guardrails. So guardrail is a concept.
Yeah.
Now the implementation of a guardrail can be done using IAM policies, bucket policies, service control policies, all sorts of these things. These are essentially security things. They allow you to do your actual day job without falling on the wayside.
Yeah.
Okay. So service control policies are a guardrail. They are implemented in such a way that they stop you from doing things which you're not supposed to do. Right. Then there are detective, like I said, I use the word controls. You can use the word guardrails as well. So detective guardrails, corrective guardrails, and preventive guardrails. And this, you can apply the same examples. You, let's say, want to just detect if someone opened the 422 over the internet, right? 0.0/0. You don't want that, right? Can you detect it? Yes, using AWS config, you can detect it. There is a config rule which you can just enable and it will detect across all your security groups. That's a detective guardrail. Can you prevent it? Yes, you can. You can say that do not allow security groups to have this kind of a rule. It will be a complicated thing, but you can actually do it. Can you correct it? Yes, you can, by having a Lambda function triggered as part of a config invocation. That will actually go and correct it. The question for you essentially is, which is the guardrail that you want to use? Preventive is best, always. For all things dangerous in life, prevention is best. Detection is halfway there, but most things are actually detections, because doing preventive for all the things is super complicated.
Yeah.
So if you look at the kind of things that most companies do, they have very strong preventive guardrails for very few things. They have detective guardrails for most of the things. And they have corrective guardrails for very few things, but they are super necessary to be done, like the 422 over the internet thing. Most other things, someone started an EC2 instance, someone stopped an EC2 instance, someone deleted a database. That's probably a preventive thing, especially in a production scenario. Someone deleted a database backup. That's probably also a protective thing. You can do that with AWS backup vaults, right? Which just does it by default because it's a vault, right? You can only write once, you can read many times, but you can't delete, right? So these are the kind of things that can be implemented. And just remember this, don't try to solve a problem which doesn't have to be solved. Sometimes it is okay just to have a detective control because it is just too complicated to solve it via preventive or corrective controls.
Okay.
So in that case, have a detective control which sends out a notification to a Slack channel and says, email that particular team that this particular thing has been opened up, because it requires intelligence, human intelligence, to figure out whether it was supposed to be done in the first place or not. Don't try to solve all problems in a corrective control because then you will just solve problems which are not supposed to be solved.
Thank you very much. Let's take one last question. We are running short of time. If anybody has. Okay, good. Now, people who are not submitted the feedback, continue to submit it. From my side, Vishesh, I will also post it in our group Telegram group. Whoever, maybe few people might have dropped, then I will ask them to drop the feedback. I have done my part already. And I just want to say thank you very much for taking such a wonderful session. Practically, I know how important it is on a day-to-day, the control tower or the landing zones, and the way you articulated, taking the examples of whether it is an apartment or condominium or a football, it's really awesome. And thank you very much, and looking forward for your future sessions. Now I'll give a few people, if you wanted to say anything about the session, please go ahead. Anybody?
Thank you, Vishesh. Thanks for your time. And we got a clear overview picture about how the control tower works and what are the components will be interacting. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Seth. I really like speaking to you guys, and just these kind of question answer sessions are the best way rather than me talking about a presentation. I had a presentation, right? And it's an official AWS presentation about control tower, but I feel so happy that I did not have to use it.
We feel it's like a brainstorming session. So
yeah, it has to
it's
be
like
a brainstorming
kind of
session. I don't know everything about everything. I know some things about some things, but that's so unless you ask me with an important customer / problem, I have no way of answering or even thinking about the questions.
Right. Thank you, Shish.
Yeah. Anybody else want to say?
Vishesh, Nacho here. Thanks for the wonderful session. I mean, this gave me a very good idea of control tower, service control policies, and organization units and all. And also special thanks to Prabhu and Joe for organizing this. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks, Nacho.
Thank you so much.
One last.
Now I'll take the last one. And I should say thank you for all of you for joining, and especially to Prabhu and Joe to organizing this. My interaction with Joe, just for everyone to know, we were working on part of a proposal for another customer, and that's how I met Joe. I actually never met him. I saw his face for the first time today, but we spoke for that proposal and we've submitted it. But that was essentially how my engagement with Joe started, and I'll be very happy to be part of these sessions going forward as well. If there's something, even I might not know everything. I mean, I don't know everything about anything anyways, but if there is something that you guys want me to cover, and even if I have to read it up, study it, prepare it, just to be able to be in a better position to talk about it or answer some of your questions, I'll be more than happy to do it.
Thanks for that, Vishesh. So what we do is in the community, we will post a poll or a whiteboard to post the questions. So in next session, when we have how to do it, today we covered why and around the aspects of theory part, let's say, right? In the next session, we will cover those questions and along with the demo.
Perfect.
Thank you all. Let's close for today. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, guys. Have a nice weekend.
Bye-bye. I hope everyone has filled up the feedback form.
Yes,
Yes, sir.
definitely.
Yes,
we did
yes.
that.
Yeah.
We already did.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Have a nice weekend.
You too.